of shamatha. But one big side benefit, of course, is we can then have that open, spacious state of mind and bring it into daily life. Meaning, instead of being like tight mind, open mind, therefore, like the analogy, dropping that pebble in the still lake, hardly a ripple, meaning we'll be able to be fully present with whatever stimulus comes our way without reacting, being able to better respond. And here in the practice, when we were reading from the Tension Revolution, it said, when he was describing this practice, he said, you simply allow your awareness to rest in its own innate luminosity and cognizance. So what do we mean by luminosity and cognizance? So here, of course, we're talking about the conventional nature of the mind. Is that the mind is simply clear and knowing, sometimes translated as clarity and awareness, and here in the attention revolution he said luminosity and cognizance. So luminosity is just another word for clarity. Cognizance means to know, to be aware. So cognizance is just another word for awareness or knowing. So when we say that the mind is clear and knowing, or has clarity and awareness, this first word is describing the entity, and the second word is describing function. What does it do? For example, a simple definition of fire is hot and burning. So what is the entity or nature of fire? Is heat. What does fire do? It burns. What is the entity or nature of the mind? Is the mind is clear or has clarity or luminosity? What does the mind do? It knows, it is aware, it is cognizant. So this word clear or clarity or luminosity really implies two things. One is that the mind is not physical. So the mind is not the brain, a function of the brain or emergent property of the brain. It's non-physical. And also, clarity means because the mind is clear or has clarity, therefore things can appear in the mind. Thoughts, emotions, memories, and so forth. Similar to the idea that just because a mirror is clear, reflections can appear in the mirror. So similarly, because the mind is clear, therefore thoughts, emotions, images, and so forth can appear in the mind. And then what does the mind do? It knows, it is aware. And of course now, these qualities of the mind are probably not so obvious to us because our mind is not very clear now. It's very dull, very obscured. A little bit like the analogy if we have water, which of course is clear by nature, but that water is full of sediment. And we look at that water that's full of sediment, we can't see the clear nature of the water. But if we put that down and allow the sediment to sink, then suddenly we see the clear nature of the water. Similarly with the shamatha practice, by allowing the mind to settle, we can start to really see this clarity, this clear nature of the mind, and the knowing awareness function of the mind also becomes more and more evident. So this resting in this clarity and awareness, as we do the practice, of course, this becomes more and more evident. So we simply, like anything, we get to know something simply by observing it. And so by observing the mind here, we get to really see that the mind is clear and knowing, or has clarity and awareness. So this conventional nature of the mind is something that we realise, come to know through shamatha practice. But also, of course, we can talk about the ultimate nature of the mind. And the ultimate nature of mind is emptiness, meaning that the mind is empty of independent existence. The mind does not exist from its own side. Now, to come to realise this, we will not realise this by simply looking at the mind. Because the conventional nature of the mind, of course, is there. We just need to look closely and we'll see it. The ultimate nature of the mind is hidden. So we need to come to realise this, we need to investigate. And that's what we're doing in Vipashyana practice. So to realise the ultimate nature of the mind is through Vipashyana practice, and we do that by investigating the mind. Whereas the conventional nature of the mind we realise through Shamatha practice simply by looking at the mind, observing the mind. And so, of course, here now we are simply doing the Shamatha practice, observing the mind. And so here we were observing or resting in awareness itself, but also the day before yesterday we were observing the mental events, the contents of the mind. And so today then we're going to combine those two practices. And so to go back to that quote from that great Dzogchen master Jujun Lingpa that we're using as a basis for this practice. Remember, he said, loosely relax and watch your thoughts from afar, clearly observing whatever arises. That which observes is called mindfulness, that which is observed is called movement. So that was the practice from the day before yesterday. And resting in that state is called stillness. So that's what we did yesterday, just resting in awareness, resting in that stillness of awareness. And what we're going to do today is identify them as such and meditate. Meaning we are to identify or to distinguish stillness from movement. So what we are going to do today is, on the basis of resting in stillness, in awareness, we're going to observe the movements of the mind. And that hopefully will allow us to be in a more open, spacious state when we're observing these thoughts, and then hopefully not so easily caught up in them. And so that's what we're going to do as today's practice. And of course here, when we talk about the movements of the mind, like the practice from the day before yesterday, we're only focusing on mental events, meaning thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images. So again, in this practice today, we're not paying attention to any sounds, sensations, visual objects, and so forth. Of course, they will all arise. Let them be there. We're not trying to block them, but we're just not paying attention to those. We're simply paying attention to the mental events, the thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images, and so forth. So what we're going to do in this practice now is we're going to start by establishing that basis in stillness for some minutes, having that space, open, spacious mind, and then on that basis, then we're going to start to observe the movements of the mind, the thoughts and emotions and so forth. Any questions about the practice before we go to it? Yeah.
I wanted to ask, when in the beginning we started to expand the mind and to different directions.
Oh, the last practice?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I made a complete picture.
Concrete picture?
Yeah, I couldn't otherwise, is it
Yeah.
the only way?
So in that practice, the idea of that practice is just to release that constriction. But if you find, as in the beginning stages, it helpful to do some visualization, okay, But ideally, it's just a matter of releasing awareness, releasing it out. If some sort of visualization helps you to do that, that's okay. That's okay, but the idea being is simply to release the contraction. Just release that.
I read something of Ajahn Sumedha, like to help you to listen to quiet.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of seeing, like observing, it's like hearing the quiet inside. So I'm asking if it's the same, because it helps me like just to be more alert, like antenna, and just to listen.
Yeah, and that's what I often do, and that's what I'll be doing today as well, particularly, is to help us to connect with that open, spacious awareness. What we actually see there is stillness.
I don't see it here.
No, so we'll come to that. So if we sort of connect with that stillness, that can really help to. And also, we could, if we're a different sort of person, we could also say that quiet space. So if that helps you to maintain that, that's okay as well.
Yes, okay.
I feel that my awareness, like the stillness, is very much anchored in the sensation, in the sense that I feel like I see better, I hear better. So I'm afraid that what you're saying is that when I'm reflecting my gaze, my concentration on the thoughts, I will lose that stillness, because it's so much about feeling and seeing better, hearing better.
Right, but didn't you just say that if you're in that stillness, everything is much more clear?
I mean, the sense objects. I mean, not much. I don't see much mental events.
Right, but maybe that's because the mental events are a little bit more subtle than the sensory events. But already fact that you're saying is that by being in that state, the sense objects seem to be much more clear and vivid. Maybe then the mental objects, maybe they're not as clear and vivid as that, but maybe they're a little bit more clear and vivid than they were before. Maybe. Have a look.
It's open view.
Keep the mind open, exactly.
No, it's also open view.
Yeah, but remember in this practice we'll come to the what's called open awareness later, I'm not sure today or tomorrow, where then we're really observing everything, including sense events. But here, this is a shamatha practice. And in shamatha practice, we need to narrow down the object, because if we're observing all 6 sense spheres, then that's a bit too broad as a shamatha practice. Of course, that would be what we would be doing in daily life, but as a shamatha practice to develop concentration, it's more efficient to narrow down to one field, either the mental or one of the sensory fields, narrow down.
We have a practice of watching the mental events, which is the foreground, and the background.
Is the stillness, yeah.
And it's the same as this.
Yeah. So the background is this stillness, this open, spacious stillness of awareness. Yeah.
So I'd like a clarification on how to stay in awareness without being mindful of everything. Just open mindfulness.
So you lost me. The question is how to
I
stay.
think when I'm resting in awareness, I'm really aware of everything.
Right.
Which is
But you're still aware of the awareness?
yes.
Great. That's today's practice. Do that. That's it. That's today's practice. As long as you maintain that awareness, then if everything's there, that's perfect. That is today's practice.
I noticed that while we were moving around with our awareness to the right and to the left, I didn't notice while I was doing it, but my gaze was shifting.
Your eyes.
Yeah. And not, like, when you say to come back, I'm like, oh, I'm here. So, is that part of it? No. Right.
Well, because for many of us, the visual sense is dominant. So if we're saying to have the awareness up, our eyes sort of like do this.
No, not up. Actually, it happened mostly to the sides. Because I felt like my ear is warmer on one side.
I think for this practice, I think it can also be very helpful to do it in a completely dark room that you may find helpful as well. But again, we're not using the eyes, and so if you notice the eyes sort of doing that, just sort of let that go, let it go, let it go.
And I noticed that in different parts of my body, the awareness has different qualities. Like in the head and in the heart, it's very different awareness, very different feeling.
Yeah, but maybe that's because the contents seem to be different when you experience awareness in those places. So anyway, that's something we can check. When you say different qualities, like example?
Like the head is more, how can I say, dividing, like me, them, a flower, like everything is, and the heart is more, no, we're all the same, togetherness, and it's more warm, it's more cold, like.
Yeah, because I think sort of physiologically we sort of identify this with thinking and this with emotions. Physiologically.
Okay.
There seems to be that correlation. So that's interesting, good.
Is this the same aware? Like.
Well, we can just look and see. I mean, maybe it's because of not so much the awareness itself, but what contents of awareness are you're associating with those different areas of the body. But anyway, just look, keep looking.
The meditation of going to the space in different directions, it seems that the object, I could read, I had no distractions, but the object was moving. And so
The object?
Yeah.
What was the object?
The object was going to the space as far as you can. So
you mean the activity or the object?
It was an activity.
Activity, yeah, the activity.
And that was the object in a way. Yeah, the object was to follow this kind of arrow going to the space. So I found it very good in a way of no distraction, but it was not stillness.
It wasn't stillness.
No.
Right, but when I said to do that, and you've done it, you've sort of moved, figuratively speaking, upwards. When you've done that, is there still movement once you've completed that? Was there still movement?
It kept moving endlessly because the space is endless.
Uh-huh.
So I kept going through all the systems, the different solar systems,
Right.
far, endless. And it was wonderful.
Okay.
And there was nothing else that I was concentrating on.
So remember, this practice is a sort of like mental gymnastics to stop the contraction. But then eventually, at the end, when we sort of merged with space and we just rested there, was there stillness then or not?
Is it? I don't know.
Keep checking, keep looking. Okay, let's do that practice. So again, we're going to start resting in stillness to establish that open, spacious mind, and then on that basis we'll start to observe the movements of the mind. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And simply releasing all appearances, allowing the mind to come to rest. Resting in awareness itself. Knowing that you're aware. resting in that open, spacious stillness of awareness. Now, whilst resting in that stillness, start to become aware of the movements of the mind.